if you haven't been told before, welcome to Shrewsbury Prison. My name's Michael. I'm going to be your guide for the next hour or so. What you get tonight is a shortened, truncated version of the tour that we normally do for the public because you've got other things to do and it's just part of an add-on to your tour. So we whiz round. We get round most of the prison. You'll see all of it. We'll talk about a little bit about what happens in those areas. We'll tell you some stories about the things that we believe have happened there. A lot of you are here for the ghosts, aren't you? We'll see. Yeah, we'll see, yeah. Well, that's absolutely fine. So we'll point out the stories that we know, and you can come and tell us what the truth is later. Okay, so you're stood on the courtyard. You're stood on the courtyard of the original prison that was built here in 1793. This is a very old prison. It closed in 2013. It's part of a prison closures exercise. If you work for public services, you'll know that that means a cost-cutting exercise. It held around 320 prisoners in its last couple of years. They're building prisons. We've got one 25 miles up in Wrexham. That holds 2,000 prisoners. We've got one in Wolverhampton called Oakwood. That holds over 2,000 prisoners. That's the trajectory. Bigger is better. I don't agree, but that's just my personal opinion. And you're not here for that, are you?
You're not wrong.
So, this was closed in 2013. That's when they turned the heating off, by the way. Try and turn it on now. I think it'll collapse, so just bear with us. Right. Originally, this was a Georgian prison. Okay? Georgian prison. That's pretty much what remains of the Georgian prison now. That's the gate lodge. That's where everybody that's come into this prison to work or has been incarcerated here since 1793 has walked through that building. It's been knocked about, it's been added to it either side, but effectively that is the old Georgian gate lodge. Some of this building here, B-wing, that bit's Georgian, that bit that looks Georgian is Victorian, and that bit's Georgian over there, so I'm not going to get hung up on architecture. It's been knocked about a lot. In the 1860s, the Victorians came along and basically knocked it down and rebuilt it. C-wing, where we go later, is built on the footprint of the original wing over there. That's why it's our most haunted prison area, we think. These ladies are going to tell me something different later, I'm sure. We'll go there a little bit later. So when it was built in Georgian times, it was one of the later Georgian prisons. The prisons that sort of came before this one was built in 1793 were awful places. If you had money, they were relatively easy. You could get whatever you wanted. The people that ran those prisons, the jailers that ran those prisons, did not get paid. They made their money by taking money off prisoners for things that they wanted or needed. That's how they made the money. They weren't managed by the government. They had very little to do with prisons in the early Georgian period. And they were run by local councils, local sheriffs, local justices of the peace. They ran those prisons. And they pretty much did what they wanted within a sort of a set of rules, sort of. They made their own rules up. So if you had money, you could have what you wanted. You could have food, you could have drink, you could have a room of your own, you could have a fire, you could have a bed, whatever you wanted. You could dine with the governor, apparently. Why you'd want to do that, I have no idea, but you could if you could afford to do it. Yes. Now, if you didn't have money, and I'm going to make a little guess here that most of the people in Georgian prisons didn't have money, you're downstairs, you're in the cellars, you're in the dungeons, as we would call them, big holding rooms. You were held in Georgian prisons until you saw a judge, and then you were held there until he decided what he wanted to do with you. Okay? You weren't sentenced to prison during that time. You were held until the judge saw you. You could be there. Here in Shrewsbury, they had 4 assizes a year, so you could be there for 3 months before you saw a judge. Then when he sentenced you, he might sentence you to transportation. It might be 2 years before you get a ship or a hulk. So you'd be there for another couple of years. You were living in those places with men and women and children all thrown in together, diseased people. People died in those places, open sewers going from one to another. There was a gentleman by the name of John Howard. When you were stood outside the gate lodge earlier, if you looked up above you, there's a bust of a man. That's John Howard. We're on Howard Street. He was the first man that ever took an interest in what was happening in the prisons in the UK and Wales. He wrote a book called The State of Prisons in England and Wales. It wasn't a bestseller. You can't get it on Amazon. But I'll basically tell you what it says. They were awful places. He wanted them to be free of disease, and he didn't want a system where you could pay to get a better level of service than other people. He said that was wrong. But nobody was really listening at that point. Then a lady by the name of Elizabeth Fry came along. Elizabeth Fry, she used to be on the back of our £5 notes, bless her. She used to tend to the women in a place called Newgate Jail in London, one of the first big jails that they built in the UK. She'd take food and clothing and bedding in for the women in there, and the children. The women and the children in that prison were living amongst the men. You can imagine that might have caused problems for some people. She campaigned to have them separated, removed from that, the women and the children, because they were being corrupted and abused by the men. Nobody was really listening until a man by the name of Robert Peel. He was the Home Secretary at the time. He listened to her, he invited her to come and speak to Parliament, and very soon after that we had the 1823 Peel Jails Act, the first piece of legislation that dictated how prisons should run. And what Howard had asked for and what Elizabeth Fry asked for came into being. It's kind of modernised the prison service. In the 1860s, the Victorian era started. The aims of the Georgian prison ethos, basically, was to try and rehabilitate prisoners, pretty much like we do today. They wanted to send out a better man than the one they got in. Unfortunately, they didn't have the skills, they didn't have the know-how, they didn't have the knowledge how to do that. It failed. So the Victorians said, okay, well, we're taking over the running of the jails now. We're going to knock down on the old Georgian jails and rebuild them. And we're going to make them so horrible that prisoners do not want to go back into prison. That will stop them committing crime. I'm going to tell you at this very early point that reoffending rates were higher in Victorian times than they are now. For lots of reasons, societal reasons, I guess, but they were. They're going to make life very hard for you. This prison was built to house 172 men and 22 women. The women, you all right?
Oh, I've got flu.
Oh, no, keep that to yourself. Women are on the smaller wing, C wing. It's one man to a cell, it's one woman to a cell. That would be a privilege these days, that would be a perk. Then it was a form of punishment. You are in the silent system. The men, you'll go into your cells and you won't come out and speak to anybody. You will not speak to anybody unless a member of staff speaks to you and asks you a question, then you will answer them. If you do, you're going to get punished. You men, again, you're going to wear hoods, like baseball caps with big peaks down the front of your face. You walk with your eyes on the ground. You won't speak to anybody. You're going to work very hard, isn't that right, Chief?
Oh, I'm not going to work hard if you don't get the bloody lot out of the way of my guide at all. What?
No, we're good. We're absolutely, these are great.
I don't care. They're not as good as my lot. Probably not as pissed as my lot, but you know.
Ah, that might be it. So the Victorian system was meant to hurt you, to abuse you, make you not want to come back. We'll talk about the labour that they did in those prisons later. More modern times, it became a local prison, and we're going to talk about that when we go into reception now. Okay, so we're going to go straight through into the... Before he goes back out. Now this covered an area from Stoke-on-Trent down to Stafford, into Shropshire, and then off into mid-Wales. It's a big geographical area. You're on remand. You are going to and from court. This is a place where people who were held remanded and in custody would have come in that geographical area. So you're going to and from in one of those lovely little vans there to court. Not nice vans. No toilets in those vans. You sit in a little compartment and a door sits on you. There are no seat belts in those vans. You could hurt yourself with a seat belt if you were in that little compartment. So there are no seat belts. No stopping in the lay-bys in mid-Wales. No stopping at the services on the M6. Literally, you fill your boots if you need the toilet. So when you get here, you're brought across the courtyard in handcuffs by a custody officer. The first thing we're going to do, because we're kind, is we're going to say, do you need the toilet? They usually would. So then we're going to start talking to them. They'll have all sorts of paperwork with them. We'll go through that paperwork with them. We'll explain to them why they're here. They come from courts are strange places. The last person they talk to in a court is the person in the dock. They're all talking to each other, barristers and lawyers, the judge. So we'll explain, we can reassure them. Okay? Then we're going to split our prisoners into two groups. We have two holding rooms, there's one there, and there's a small one at the back there. Two types of prisoners in UK prisons. We have our mainstream prisoners, our general population, and we have our vulnerable prisoners. Does anybody know what a vulnerable prisoner is?
Someone who's got maybe mental health issues.
Yeah, that would be in amongst that. Sex offenders, that would definitely be in amongst that, yeah. Anybody, you're both right, anybody who might become a victim of violence, abuse, bullying from other prisoners. Okay, so those two do come into it. But what else comes into it? Ex-professional people who've got some connection to the criminal justice service. Okay, so we've got ex-policemen, ex-prison officers, ex-lawyers. Any lawyers here tonight? You would be a vulnerable prisoner. And me. That's just us two then, okay. Yes. Anybody who's been moved from one part of the country to another because he's fallen foul of a gang somewhere or a drug gang or he's given evidence against somebody, that will follow him around the country, so he is now a vulnerable prisoner because he might get harmed wherever he goes. So we split them, we put them in their rooms now, we lock the doors, we check everybody in on the computer. They're in there now talking about climate change, about the Middle East situation, about the upcoming general elections in America, the things that keep them awake at night. What they're really doing is getting to know each other. Where are you from? Don't know you, don't know your brother, what you're in for. They want to know about each other, don't they? That's human nature. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to get to know a bit more about them. So there's a process now. We're processing our prisoners. The first place we're going to take in, round the corner to see somebody from healthcare. Any healthcare professionals in tonight? You're all working. Oh, well, there's one. Well done. Well done. Thank you, sir. We take healthcare very seriously in modern prisons. In Victorian times, there would have been a medical, and it would have gone something like, send the next man in, matron. Is he fit to work? Yes. Does he have a disease? No. Next. That would have been about it. Nowadays, it's a bit more, as we would recognise the medical. Their system's connected with the NHS system, so they can check and verify everything about his medical condition, any ongoing conditions, any medication, all that kind of stuff, and make sure that he's okay. What they're going to talk about quite seriously is his mental health. Mental health is a big, if you've grown up watching porridge like I did, or some more modern 3D dramas, a few of them have been filmed in here. Happy Valley, did anybody watch Happy Valley? Yeah. Tommy Lee's cell is A113. That was when he got his prison seats towards the back end there. It became the most popular cell on the tours for a while. Upstairs, some of you may have seen Sean Bean's cell when they filmed Time in here with Stephen Graham. Probably the best dramatic depiction of a more modern prison system that any other drama I think I've ever seen. That was all filmed here. Other things have been here as well. Coronation Street, Casualty, Man Like Mabine. That was good. Banged Up, all sorts of things have been filmed here because it's real and it's very authentic, obviously. So it's a typical Victorian wing. 4 landings, all pretty much the same. All these big open landings, these big galleried landings. The modern prisons have gone back to this style of prison. These landings are safer for prisoners and for staff than the ones that were building in the 60s and in the 70s. I worked at one prison called Featherstone where you've got a corridor here. My landing had an open area here with a phone and an office. It had a corridor down there, 14 cells down there, and then what goes, I turn around, I've got 14 cells going up here, and then I go down this corridor. 14 cells down there. By the time I'd reached the bottom of that, I'd got one half of that landing to do. I got 3/4 of my landing unlocked. I couldn't see what's going on down there. And staff couldn't see me at the end of that one. So they were dangerous for prisoners and staff. People don't tend to do daft and bad things when they're being watched. These galleries mean you're being watched. There are staff on every landing watching people and watching what they're doing. So everybody feels that's a little bit safer. The Victorians could build good prisons. The cells that you're in tonight, you'll see at the back of the wall there's a grill. That was the Victorian heating system. I'm sorry to bang on about heating. I know what you've got coming. They had coal-fired furnaces underneath this wing. That generated warm air. Obviously, warm air rises, it would have come out into those cells. All they did in more modern times was put a gas-fired boiler house at the back of the wing, and that would have forced warm air into the cells. The cells were warm. That's why the cold's been got into these walls now, you can feel it, can't you? And that's damp, so you see the paint coming off, it's dirty. Prisons were warm and they were spotless. They're absolutely spotless places. That was a big part of the job. Make the environment clean and fresh and healthy, and people will respond to that. Cells were checked every day and every landing had its cleaners, and they'd be cleaning every day as well. What else did they do, the Victorians? Oh yes, these are suicide nets. Metal sprung nets now. More modern ones. Don't go on them, they've not been tested for a long time. And they were tested every other year, I think it was. In Victorian times, they were aware of the kind of behaviour, people getting thrown over there or jumping over there to kill themselves or hurt themselves badly. Victorians had a system. These eyelets all the way down this landing on both sides, you can see them, they had ropes crisscrossed across the landings. one on here, and there was one on the threes up there to stop people falling too far. So they were pretty switched on. They were pretty switched on, their prisons. A lot of the prisons around the country that we know now, in the big cities, the inner city prisons, they're old Victorian jails and they're still functioning perfectly well. In your cells, you will know this, I don't need to tell you, you have a toilet, don't use it. You have a basin, doesn't work. And you have got some electricity points in there. Some of you might be lucky enough to have one that works. I don't know. Some of them do. So, when do you think the toilets went into the cells? What decade? If you know the answer because you've read it, don't say it. Yeah. When would you have expected them to go in?
When it was built.
Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You would have I would have said the 60s or the 70s, yeah. 1995, to be exact, in this prison, 1995.
How did they do that?
I'm going to get round to that.
The nets, right?
Oh, here's a little bit of an irony for you. Georgian prisons, their cells had toilets in them. Victorian cells didn't. Yeah. Those plucky Victorians, eh? Yes, 1995. And that only came around as a result of something bad happening, which I'll talk about very briefly in a moment. So, up to that point, I'll just tell you one other thing. This wing held around 300 prisoners, okay? On average. At its height, this prison held 450 prisoners. It was, for a short space of time in the 80s, the most overcrowded prison in the country. It was built for 172 men and 22 women. It had over 450 prisoners. That meant on this wing, you would have had 3 and 4 men to most of these cells. 3 and 4 men to most of these cells. When you've got that kind of overcrowding, you've got your staff level, you've got your prisoners. The number of the prisoners shoots up. That means you're not going to have the time to do the things that you would normally do. You're just not going to. So prisoners will be locked up early. They'd be locked up at 6 o'clock. 3 or 4 of them in these cells. Locked up at 6 o'clock and unlocked at 7:30 in the morning. A bucket. A bucket. Not each. 1 bucket per cell. We'll talk about the food later. Do you think we were unlocking happy prisoners? No. There's also a thing, when I said that because they're being locked up for longer, they're getting restless, they're getting angry, staff are not interacting with them. There's a culture in some prisons, I have to say this, where prisoners... Damaged tonight, I don't know why. These predated prison, these are called pillories. They predated prison times, so in very old times, Tudor times, Stuart times, if you committed a crime, you'd go into a lockup, you go before a magistrate, and what it could do, one sentence it could do is to put you in the pillory. Maybe a couple of days, depending on what you'd done. So you'd go in there. Sometimes you would be stripped naked, tied to the back of a cart and taken round the town before you went in there. So people could abuse you verbally and throw stuff at you before you actually got into the pillory. Public humiliation was the name of the game in those times. Public humiliation. They put you in there, you good people would come along, you would throw stuff. It was rarely rotten food. Food was too precious. It was more likely something a little further down the food chain that would get thrown at people in there. They also had cats called mousers. Savage little feral cats, they would throw those at people in there and they would just basically claw away at their face and their eyes. People got hurt in these things. You could physically abuse them as well. Part of your punishment might be once a day, maybe twice a day, you'll be taken out of the pillory and taken to a post, tied to it and whipped. That's where the expression pillar to post comes from. And then you'll be put back in there. So next time you use it, just think on, it could be worse. So this is where the women would have done their hard labour. C wing, that one over there, where we're going to go in a moment. That's the one. Let's wait for the bat sign. That's a production company. They're going for that. They're going. Seeming is where the women were up until 1922. From 1860 when they built, in the 1860s when they built it, till 1922, that's where the women were kept. Then they built prisons for women, and they left here, and that became a wing for vulnerable prisoners and juvenile offenders awaiting going to Borstal. This is where the women would have done their hard labour. Now, there was no sexism in Victorian times, ladies. I'm on your side, but would you mind doing the laundry for us? It's too difficult for the men, so the women would do that out here for 6 or 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. You can see those bars sticking out the window there. Maybe just see them. That's where they would have hung their washing lines from. 6 or 8 hours. If you're not doing that, ladies, you're going to do a thing called oakum picking. Big, thick ropes sent down from the shipyard. You're going to sit in silence on the wing and strip those ropes into single strands with your fingers. Once you've done that, you're going to take those single strands and you're going to strip them into fibres. Those fibres were sent back to the shipyards and they were used as packing for new ships. The men, we've got some work for you guys. So you come out yourselves in the morning with your hoods on, with your heads down, and in silence you're taken in groups to places of work. It could be the treadmill, the tread wheel. You stand, you hold a bar, there's a partition between you and the next man so you can't communicate. You hold that bar, step onto the first step, you push that down, and you push the next one down, and you keep doing that all day for 6 to 8 hours, 6 days a week. It doesn't do anything. It's just meaningless, pointless, hard labour. The ethos of the Victorian jail was to break the man and then make the man through religious enlightenment. So that labour is hard, it's physically draining, it's basically at the end of the day you are going to collapse. People got hurt on those things. Did any of you see the Judge Linda documentaries that he did, the series? He talked about that, he came here and he talked about that, the treadmill. People got hernias on those things that they're not treated, and that can be dangerous. What else can you do? You can do moving some rocks about. Big pile of rocks in the corner of the yard. A group of you will be told to take those rocks, carry them over to that side of the yard, and when you've done that, take them all back again. And when you've done that, what's next? No, have a little rest. And then take them back. You get the idea. You get the idea. Maybe you stay in your cell because you've got a thing called the crank in your cell. That's not a funny prisoner or a funny member of staff. That's a black box on the wall with a big handle on it. You will be told to stand and turn that handle all day, 6 to 8 hours, maybe longer. Turn it and turn it. Now if you found that easy because you're a big strong man, or maybe I just don't like you, I'm a warder now in Victorian times, I can